Kideaters vs. Zoo BoyZ, Chapter 6, Part B. Before the boys were released from jail, they met with Hanson's staff in a pre-briefing meeting. That was a complete turnoff. Unbearably boring. It was like being in school. Now they were about to undergo some hands-on training. From somewhere inside themselves, they felt a surge of excitement and unbridled energy. They weren't even sure where it came from. They studied her, referring back to Major Hightower, her motions, as Major Hightower displayed some weapons and certain specific tools of the trade. Occasionally, their thoughts would divert to what was actually being demonstrated, like when she shot out a net launcher onto a fairly nearby taxidermied bear. They expressed somewhat of a gasp, but their eyes and thoughts flowed quickly, recovering focus on who was teaching them, not what was being taught. She seemed to be taunting them by bending at the pelvis rather than the knees. Dave noticed a weakness in his own knees, one that he had never experienced before. Ron thought back to some of the stories he wrote that involved a beautiful model seducing a secret agent. He got a certain thrill when describing those characters and their actions. What he wrote formulated beautiful fantasies in his mind. Jeremy remembered a Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition being passed among classmates before the original hint of arousal was coupled with looking at females in a J.C. Penney's and Sears catalog, the women's undergarment section. Not too long ago, before all this, Dave found his dad's girly magazines under a mattress. He mixed what he saw in front of him now with the adult images he took mental pictures of back then. John, being the oldest and an artist, checked out the natural, anatomically correct, well-formed, defined structure of the female's body. He marveled at the perfect placement and proportioned curves. For him, human sexuality had not been perverted yet. He was aroused by photographs and paintings he viewed in several art museums he was fortunate enough to visit. He blushed as he passed by certain provocative exhibits and tried to take a quick glance when passing by. His hope was that no one else noticed he was looking. Unfortunately, the boys' sex drive prevented them from hearing important details and drills. Miss Hightower held their attention without diversion, but for all the wrong reasons. What Major Hightower was explaining was the safety instructions needed when using the equipment they were taking with them to the zoo island. The young adults she was tutoring assumed they already knew how to do things like fire a gun. After all, they had seen it done in so many high-impact action movies. That was more fantasy than reality, but it was all taken for granted. Ron's fantasy of Hightower taking advantage of him was interrupted by an extremely deafening explosion. The other three were reeled in as they gasped for air. Major Hightower shouted while their ears were ringing, "As I said, cover your ears before someone fires the flash bomb or flash bang. We all need to follow my instructions and directions. Do you hear me? Can you follow me?" The youngsters were willing to follow this figure anywhere. She repeated herself, "Can you hear me?" They nodded in reply. Their major continued in a shout, "Children, it's a matter of life and death." John, although the oldest, was the first to realize he was way too young to be romantically involved with his teacher in any way, form, or fashion. When she shouted the adjective children, it brought that fact to life. As the ringing in the adolescent's ears was dissipating, the officer reached for the next piece of artillery. Dave's eyes moved off her and toward the ridiculously large gun she grasped with both hands. Her voice pulled Ron's imagination back into the current situation. They heard the words, "Some may have sharp teeth and ferocious appetites to feed, or fight, not retreat. They want to eat anything that is available, like an afternoon treat. You would be like an afternoon delight for them." Jeremy, without thinking, said, "All the better to eat you with." John replied, "Kideaters." Ron nodded in fear. Dave said, "Just let them try." Hightower didn't hear him. Even their nonverbal responses made her feel like she finally had their attention on the content being covered rather than on the way she was created sexually. Her demands were made clear. You could end up hurting yourself, or worse, hurting one of your platoon members. This ain't no joke, boys. Any of you ever fired a real gun? Her students didn't want to admit it. She took their silence response as a hard no. She affirmed, "That's what I thought." She took a deep breath as she picked up and flung another rifle around, pointing out the safety switch. She also showed them another button that, when pushed in, drops the cartridge holding the magazine of bullets, so a new one can be loaded. She confirmed, "If you push that rather than flipping the safety switch off, you'll not only not be ready to fire, you'll instantly be out of ammo. We must get ready." She crouched down, then went flat onto her belly. "Aim." She closed one eye and pressed her open eye onto the scope above the barrel. "Confirm what you're aiming at, as well as what is beyond the target." Her eye still fixed within the scope connected to the gun. "Only then do we," her voice lowered in volume, "release the safety." Her trigger finger slid down slowly to move the switch ever so gently and soft. They noticed she took a deep breath and held it in. They were mesmerized as they observed her finger move back to the trigger. Then John covered his ears and looked at his friends. All but Dave moved their hands to muffle their ears, too. They heard a quick and almost quiet platty-plat, tat-tat. Dave said, "Well, that was overwhelming." "Underwhelming." Major Hightower argued, "Not every assault is loud. Some are almost silent, but this one serves its purpose." They watched her saunter over to the big stuffed bear. Ronnie said, "It did nothing." She bent at her knees as she grasped the bear to turn it around. The side they had not seen yet was torn to ribbons. Jeremy said, "That little ratty-tat-tat does that?" His new hero answered, "We call them barbed bullets. They go in, hardly leaving a trace, but after passing through the victims, they grab vital organs and splatter them across any and everything beyond your target. You can kill several things with one shot. As I already said, when you aim, take note of what is behind where you're aiming, because these projectiles will hit well past where you intended as well." John raised his hand. She nodded. He formulated his question. "Well, I mean, you plan on, killing the animals? Before she answered, she looked around as if not wanting anyone to hear. As far as the boys knew, they were there alone with her. This was the first time their instructor spoke softly. Some of them. She crouched again, let out a grunt as she moved the bear back around. And if she grunted. Her grunts continued as her body gyrated to move the heavy bear. Yeah, yes, yes. If we are in danger, if any of the creatures resist our attempt to capture them, putting us in harm's way, we will kill. I say we because you may have to pull that trigger too. The severity of the situation was kicking in. This wasn't just playing war in the woods with plastic toy guns. She stood erect again, towering over the well-stuffed grizzly bear. She admired how she had the boy's undivided attention, aware that some credit must be given to her gender alone. Just being the opposite sex called for the boy's fixation. Hansen argued with his army of soldiers that a female would lead these boys better than an overzealous testosterone-filled male. He thought they'd fare better with someone who possessed a motherly stature. She spoke with such confidence and clarity. When Mr. Hansen first offered me this job, I refused it. My indifference with this training, with the whole mission, is that you children shouldn't even be old enough to hold, let alone handle, any type of tactical weapons. These are not BB guns you begged for your mama to buy you for Christmas. They aren't like a paintball gun that are virtually harmless unless you get hit in the eye. However, we do have some less lethal munitions. I want to see how you kids handle some of the armament that fires less lethal ammo. You, she pointed at Ronnie. He felt the blood rush to his face, then back out again. He shivered as he answered, pointing to himself with one finger and placing his other hand over the pocket containing his pet. Me? Yes, you. Come up here to my table. His friends wondered why she picked the youngest and smallest of them all first. Ronnie took small, unassertive steps toward her. She picked up one of the bulky firearms, then continued, This one shoots less lethal artillery. Notice, I did not say non-lethal or that it is not lethal. Although Ron was now up there with her, she addressed all four boys. Even a taser can be lethal if used the right way, or the wrong way, depending on your mission or what you're trying to accomplish. Dave's eyes moved over to the cattle prodder taser on the table. He remembered the incident from their last trip to Zoo Island. She handed the gun to Ronnie as she reached for an identical one that was sitting on the table, full of all kinds of gadgets, devices, and hunting-type gear. Ronnie took the one she gave him, and he marveled at how heavy it was. He pointed it toward the ground and kept his finger away from the trigger. Hightower spoke. Mine looks like yours, doesn't it? Without warning, she took quick aim and fired at a wall, putting a hole right through the concrete block. Now, you shoot the one you have. Ronnie slowly raised the gun. He tried to remember the prior instructions. He held it in the direction of the wall, put his finger on the trigger, and squeezed it. Nothing happened. Hightower asked softly, Did you remove the safety? He slid his finger down. Searching for the button, he saw the major click. It wasn't there. Major Hightower took a deep breath, trying to be patient. She formed her words as gently as she could possibly muster. Are you left-handed? Ronnie didn't answer. She prodded, "What hand do you write with?" My left?" He didn't mean for it to come out as a question. He knew he was left-handed. She nurtured him. "So, let your trigger finger be your left index finger." It took everything in Hightower not to become completely exasperated. They heard her take another deep breath and explained, "Okay, so the safety is going to be a little tricky because it's on the other side of the trigger. If you were right-handed, that is fine because it's located on the right side. But," she took another long, deep breath in, "but we'll have to... Oh, here, just give it to me. Point toward the ground and hand it to me." Ronnie felt like a coward. John feared he'd have the same issue. He was left-handed too. He asked his own mind, "Guns are made for right-handers only? That doesn't seem right. Even some golf clubs are made for lefties." He had no answer to that question in his head. Hightower sat hers on the table and tried holding his with her left hand, Ron's. As she fumbled trying to demonstrate properly, she inquired, "How many of you are southpaws, left-handed?" John slowly inched his left hand from close to his body up and into the air. He looked at his friends and defensively proclaimed, "What? I was born that way." Another although still in fear, Ronnie confirmed, "Yeah, me too." Hightower tisked before speaking again. "Well, I read a background profile on you four, but didn't state that 2 out of the 4 are southpaws. That would have been helpful information. All these guns are for right-handers. I didn't bring any that are specifically made for the opposite handlers. So, lefties, you'll have to use your right hand to release the safety, then aim, then pull the trigger with your left hand." She handed the gun back to Ronnie. He didn't want to take it, but felt forced to. "Careful now. The safety is still on, so look on the right side of the rifle. See the little round button next to the trigger?" Ronnie turned the gun sideways, and as he did, unknowingly pointed it in the direction of the instructor and his friends. The major's shout startled him so bad he almost dropped it. His friends and Major Hightower instinctively ducked. She barked, "Whoa, no, never point it around. Point down, but not at your foot either." Ronnie felt so defeated. Then he became angry at himself. She reminded herself that her audience were just children, just babes. She noticed his timid, unconfident demeanor. She knew she wouldn't be able to help them if she shot down what little self-confidence they had. Ronnie begged, "Can you just please let Dave do it first so I can see?" Miss Hightower insisted, No, you're all going to get a chance. All 4 of you need to learn, even if it's just the basics." Ronnie whispered to himself, "I don't want a chance." Major Hightower went around Ronnie and approached him from behind. David smirked. John and Jeremy were thinking the exact same thing. "She's gonna hug him from behind." She did just that. Ronnie felt her warm inner arms against his. She crouched down a bit, arms around his, her crotch pressed tight to his butt. Ronnie felt drops of sweat trickling down his underarms. He became lightheaded as he noticed her breath moving through the hairs on his head. Then her cheek touched the tiny hairs on the back of his neck, making him shiver a little bit. The hair on his arms stood up at attention. Goosebumps began to rise. She spoke soft and gently. "Okay now." She grabbed his right hand and moved it toward the safety button. Ronnie was turning into jello. Still, at a whisper, she guided him. Push the button, the safety button. She took a deep breath, then let out slowly. Ronnie wasn't sure if he was still breathing at all. Without fully realizing it, his heart rate elevated, and his respirations began to increase as the woman continued. Now then, put your left hand on the trigger guard, the metal hoop, or ring around the trigger. So, see, you'll find you'll have to take the safety off, then take aim. Normally we would aim first and confirm our target, but it's okay. Her left hand cupped his left hand. She placed her index finger on top of his. As simple as this gesture was, it was something Ronnie had never experienced. She whispered, Now, breathe in, hold your breath, move your finger off the rim of the trigger, and gently squeeze. She forced his finger to fire. The bullet shot out with tremendous force, causing Ronnie to be thrusted back a little, pressing him into Miss Hightower even more. The bullet bounced off the concrete wall. The boys thought Ronnie did something wrong. Ronnie's vision was still a bit blurry from having one eye closed too long. He blinked, trying to get his full vision back. He was able to see a black streak fly through the air. He was sure he hit something. Whatever it was must have been blown to pieces, and that dark streak was one of those fragments. Rubber! Dave shouted. Miss Hightower confirmed. That's affirmative. This one is loaded with rubber bullets, less lethal than ammo I have in the gun I first fired. Pay attention, because some guns can hold real bullets as well as less lethal bullets, like this one. She pointed to the bullet that flew off the wall and onto the ground, closer to where they stood. John wondered if being shot with a rubber bullet still hurt. Jeremy wondered what it felt like to be hugged from behind by a woman. Dave asked, Can those bullets also kill something? She answered, Only if it hits the victim in the right place, or if it's a very fragile creature, like some birds. However, these and the beanbag launchers are more of a deterrent than something you would use to shoot and kill. Some beasts just get more angry if you sting them with these. Ronnie shook his head, trying to transfer from fantasy back into reality. Jeremy raised his hand and blurted out, I want to be next, please. She ignored him completely. Their mentor had so much to cover and only a day to cover it. She knew she'd have to give an extremely brief sample of the equipment and leave out some things that she could not trust the boys to use at all. As she went along, she emphasized which instruments they were forbidden to even look at for any length of time, let alone lay a finger on. She covered the difference between gas grenade launchers and some smoke bombs they would throw by hand. She covered how to wear a gas mask, how to apply camo makeup, and how to use a wildlife containment device, just a fancy name for a cow prodder. That was the long staff that the taser prongs on the end, with the taser prongs on the end. It was that same kind that they saw that lunatic Robinson carry on their last visit to Zoo Island. The boys had no trouble recalling when Dave handled the one given to him as they made their way back out of Zoo Island, no longer accompanied by the Caruso character. It was even the same brand as the one Dave surrendered when the rescue helicopters showed up. The new training classes gave the kids the confidence they needed to begin this major undertaking. They knew more than Major Hightower when it came to what life was really like on Zoo Island, but she knew more about tactics, and would be packing the firepower needed to back them up. She got them as prepped and ready to go as she could, but they knew there was a need for more than just Army-Navy store-bought material schemes and dreams. It was going to take an actual full-trained army to really win this battle. They honestly needed some of the scientists who bred the creatures to begin with. However, they had none of that at their disposal. To decode the island's secrets behind the habitat's dwelling was no small task. Both great and small creatures were going to be almost impossible to round up, corral, and get into nets, crates, and cages. The underlying question was, after containment, how were they going to get them onto ships or aircraft, and eventually onto trucks waiting on the mainland? Following a full day of rigorous training, they finally stopped everything so they could have dinner. Although their bodies stopped, their minds were still racing and trying to comprehend all the information and details that were thrown at them. They felt as if they were trying to drink water from a fire hydrant. In between bites, Dave let out what he had been trying to hold in since they were delivered to this place. He blurted out, Major, so let's meet the crew and get on with these classified excursions. Major Hightower proclaimed, "Ha! Crew? My dear boy, you are the crew. You four and me. That's it. And I'm all you really need." John thought how much that sounded like something Dave would say. That's the full end of Chapter 6. I need to include here that the boys stayed the night there, perhaps practiced a little bit more the next day, and then flew out that night. I haven't made it clear so far whether it's day or night too much, other than when the boys sleep later. Again, this is all unedited, rough drafts. I'm reading it, although I'm not reading it well, but I'm getting it out there so I can hear it myself and make changes and do things that might make it better. So now, on to Chapter 7.